My name is Sarah Reynolds, a police officer with the Chicago Police Department for almost 5 years. I was born and raised in a middle-class neighborhood on the city's south side. My biological father was a police officer, but he died in the line of duty when I was only 7. 3 years later, my mother remarried to Robert Wilkins, a veteran sergeant in the same precinct where my father had worked. Ever since I was little, I knew I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps. That blue uniform represented everything I valued: protection, justice, and community service. For Robert, however, this was simply man business. He never hid his disapproval when I expressed my desire to join the police academy. "Women don't have the temperament for this work," he would often say at family dinners. "It's too dangerous, too brutal. You should consider nursing or perhaps working in the department's administrative area." Despite his resistance, I joined the academy at 23 after completing my degree in criminal justice. I was third in my class, but that didn't impress Robert. To him, I was just a girl playing cop, destined to quit at the first truly dangerous situation I faced. By a twist of fate, I ended up being assigned to the same precinct where Robert was a sergeant. While most rookie officers would be assigned to quieter areas, he used his influence to place me in one of the city's most violent districts, Senglewood. I'm sure he hoped this would make me quit. Instead, I became even more determined to prove myself. For 4.5 years, I dealt with all kinds of situations: domestic violence, gangs, shootings, overdoses. Every day was a challenge, but I loved my job. I loved making a difference, even if it was just for one person. My patrol colleagues learned to trust me. I was known for my calm under pressure and my ability to de-escalate tense situations without resorting to force. Robert, however, remained skeptical. At every family gathering, he found ways to belittle my accomplishments or insinuate that I was being favored because I was a woman. "You've never faced a truly dangerous situation," he would say. "The other officers are protecting you, doing the heavy lifting for you." Things got worse when I was promoted to junior detective after 4 years of service. Although the promotion was based on merit, I had one of the best case-solving records among the rookies. Robert insisted it was just a diversity policy. He even suggested I'd slept with someone to get the promotion. It all culminated in a Sunday dinner at my mother's house about 3 months ago. It was a family tradition. Every Sunday, we gathered for a big dinner. That particular night, I was sharing about a complex drug trafficking case my team had solved. We were all sitting at the table: my mother, Robert, myself, my younger brother Kyle, and my aunt Patricia. "It was really impressive how we managed to connect all the dots," I explained, genuinely proud of the team's work. 6 months of investigation, and we finally nailed the whole network. Robert took a sip of his bourbon and smiled in that condescending way I knew so well. "Let me guess," he interrupted. "You sat in some surveillance van while the men did the heavy lifting, right?" I felt my face heat up. Actually, I was leading the undercover operation. I spent 3 months building a fake identity to gain their trust. He muttered, clearly not believing me, "and I bet he got this job just because they needed a pretty woman to distract some drug dealers." "Robert!" my mother exclaimed, but he just shrugged. "I'm just being realistic. We know how these things work." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. I was chosen because I'm good at my job. I have the best record of solved cases among the junior detectives. "Easy cases," he scoffed. "I bet they give you the easy cases to inflate your stats." I was about to reply when my phone rang. It was Captain Rodriguez. Something in his tone told me he was serious. "Reynolds speaking," I answered, pushing away from the table. "Sarah, we need you on scene. We have a hostage situation in the 6700 block of South Green Street. A series of houses, possible domestic violence that has escalated. The suspect is armed, has his wife and 2 small children inside." My heart raced. South Green Street was only 4 blocks from my mother's house. "I'm on my way, sir. I'll be there in 5 minutes." I hung up the phone and quickly explained the situation to my family. "I have to go," I said, grabbing my jacket and service weapon from the entryway closet. Robert laughed as he lifted me to my feet. "There goes the hero cop. They'll probably have you stand outside the perimeter, keeping the curious away." I stopped in the doorway and turned to him. "You'll never see me as a real cop, will you?" "Honey," he said, his tone irritatingly patronizing. It's not a matter of seeing, it's reality. When things get really dangerous, when lives are at stake, ... Well, you're pretty much finished. This isn't a job for someone like you. At that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just anger at his words, but an iron determination to prove him wrong once and for all. We'll see, I replied simply, and left. The Chicago sky was overcast that night, with heavy clouds promising rain. I ran the 4 blocks to South Green Street, my mind already shifting into professional mode, despite the disturbing conversation with Robert. When I arrived at the scene, the situation was already set. Police cruisers with flashing lights formed a perimeter around a small 2-story row house. Neighbors stood on the sidewalks, some in pajamas, all with expressions of fear and curiosity. I identified myself to the officer guarding the perimeter and was directed to the command post, where Captain Rodriguez was coordinating the operation. "Reynolds, I'm glad you got here quickly," he said, his face tense. "We have a complicated situation. The suspect is Marcus Wilson, 35, with a history of domestic violence and illegal gun possession. He's holding his wife, Tamika, and 2 daughters, ages 4 and 6, hostage. Apparently, Tamika said she wanted a divorce, and he lost control. Did he make any demand?" I asked, studying the diagram of the house the captain had improvised. "Not yet. We tried to reach him by phone, but he's not answering. We have a SWAT team on the way, but there's still at least 20 minutes away. Any information on the weaponry?" Neighbors reported hearing what sounded like a revolver being fired inside the house earlier, before our arrival. "Probably a .38 or similar." I nodded, absorbing the information. "Do we have any negotiators on site?" Captain Rodriguez hesitated. "The official negotiator is on another case across town. You've gone through basic negotiation training, right?" "Yes, sir. I completed the advanced course 6 months ago." He looked at me for a moment, assessing. I knew what he was thinking. I was relatively new, a woman in a male-dominated field, and this was a life-or-death situation. But he also knew I had a gift for connecting with people in crisis. "Okay, Reynolds. You'll lead the negotiations until the SWAT team arrives. Keep him talking, try to establish rapport, buy time. The top priority is the safety of the hostages." "Understood, sir." As I prepared to make first contact, I noticed a familiar car pull up abruptly across the street. It was Robert, still in his dinner clothes. He'd probably heard the call on the radio and come straight here. Our eyes met for a moment, and even from a distance, I could see his disapproving expression. I ignored him and focused on the task at hand. I put on a bulletproof vest, tested the megaphone, and approached the house, taking cover behind a patrol car. "Marcus Wilson? This is Detective Sarah Reynolds of the Chicago Police Department. I'm here to help resolve this situation peacefully." "Silence." I tried again. "Marcus, I know you're going through a hard time. Let's talk about it. No one needs to get hurt today." After what seemed like an eternity, a male voice finally answered, shouting through the 2nd-story window. "Go away! This is between me and my family. If anyone tries to come in, we will all die here." "I understand that you want to protect your family, Marcus. That's what we're trying to do too. We all want Tamika and the girls to be safe. Tamika wants to leave." "Me? Take my daughters away. I won't allow it." I realized I had his attention, at least momentarily. For the next few minutes, I maintained a constant dialogue, trying to humanize him and myself, building some kind of connection. "Marcus, I've been through tough relationships too. I know how it feels like everything is falling apart when someone you love wants to leave. But your daughters need their dad alive and present in their lives, not in prison or worse." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Robert approaching Captain Rodriguez, gesturing toward me. I could hear fragments of his conversation. ... Very explosive situation. Let me take over ... I ignored the distraction and remained focused on Marcus. Slowly, I managed to convince him to let me speak to Tamika, to confirm that she and the children were unharmed. It was a small but crucial step forward. Tamika's shaky voice came from the same window. "Please help us! He has a gun. He's threatening to shoot the girls. And then himself." "Tamika, we'll get you out of there safely, I promise." "Marcus, let the kids out. They must be scared." "No! No one leaves until we resolve this." The situation was growing increasingly tense. I heard over the radio that the SWAT team was still 10 minutes away. We needed to buy more time. That's when I heard a child's high-pitched scream from inside the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. My blood ran cold. "Marcus!" I yelled. "What happened? Is everyone okay in there? Silence. Marcus, please respond. We need to know if anyone is hurt." More silence, followed by baby cries. At that moment, I made a decision that went against all protocol, but which my instinct told me was necessary. I signaled to Captain Rodriguez that I would attempt a backdoor approach. He nodded reluctantly and quickly organized cover for me. I saw Robert gesturing furiously, clearly opposed to the plan, but the captain ignored him. I slipped silently into the side yard, using the shadows as cover. The back door opened into a small kitchen. Through the window, I could see the room was empty. I tested the doorknob, blocked, as expected. Using my toolkit, I was able to pick the lock in seconds, a skill I had honed during my training that often proved useful in situations like this. I entered the house silently, gun drawn, all my senses on high alert. He could hear voices coming from the living room, Marcus yelling at Tamika, the muffled cries of the children. "You ruined everything! Now look what you made me do!" Moving slowly down the hallway, I reached a spot where I could peer into the room without being seen. The sight made my heart sink. Marcus stood, holding a revolver, while Tamika knelt on the floor, hugging the two girls. There was a bullet hole in the wall, just inches above Tamika's head. I quickly assessed the situation. Marcus was unsteady, but the shot to the wall suggested he might still be resisting the urge to actually hurt his family. His posture, however, showed that this resistance was wearing thin. I decided to reveal my presence. "Marcus," I called calmly, keeping myself partially shielded by the doorframe, my gun pointed at the ground in a non-threatening. "I'm Detective Reynolds. We've been talking for a few minutes outside, remember?" He turned sharply, pointing the gun at me. "How did you get in here? I told you no one was allowed in." "I'm worried about you and your family, Marcus. I heard a gunshot and needed to make sure no one was hurt." I kept my voice calm, even with the gun barrel pointed at my chest. "I see everyone is physically okay. That's good. We can keep it that way." "Get out of here," he shouted, his hands shaking. "I can't do this, Marcus. I won't let you do something that will destroy your life and the lives of your daughters forever." I took a small step forward, maintaining eye contact. "Look at them, Marcus. Look how scared they are." For a brief moment, her eyes strayed to her daughters who were sobbing in their mother's arms. I saw something change in her expression, a flicker of awareness, perhaps even shame. "I just wanted her to listen to me," he said, his voice breaking. "I just wanted my family together." "I know you," I replied softly, "and I know you love your daughters more than anything. That's why you need to put down that gun now, for them, so they know their father is strong enough to do the right thing, even when it's hard." "It's too late," muttered, but I noticed the gun began to lower slightly. "It's never too late to make the right choice, Marcus. Your daughters will remember this moment for the rest of their lives. Show them that even in the darkest moment, you chose to protect them." Tears began to stream down his face. The gun lowered a little further. "What will happen to me? You will face the legal consequences of your actions, yes, but you will also receive the help you need. And, most importantly, your daughters will know that when the time came, you chose their lives and safety above all else." Our eyes met, and in that moment, I felt a genuine connection had been made. Not as police officer and suspect, but as two human beings in a desperate situation. "Please," I said, extending my free hand. "Hand over the gun, and we'll figure this out together." There was a moment of absolute tension, a tipping point where everything could have gone horribly wrong. But then, slowly, Marcus lowered the gun completely and placed it on the ground. "Step away from the gun," I instructed gently. He obeyed, taking 2 steps back, his hands raised in surrender. I moved quickly to retrieve the revolver, never taking my eyes off him. Over the radio, I informed Captain Rodriguez that the situation was under control, the hostages were safe, and the suspect had surrendered peacefully. Within seconds, the house was stormed by officers who escorted Tamika and the children out, while others handcuffed Marcus. He didn't resist. When I finally left the house, following Marcus to the police car that would take him to the police station, my eyes met Robert's. He was standing near the perimeter, his face a mix of emotions, shock, confusion, and perhaps a hint of reluctant respect. I handed Marcus's revolver to the forensic technician and approached Captain Rodriguez to give my preliminary report. Robert joined us, still silent. "Excellent work, Reynolds," the captain praised. "You diffused a potentially catastrophic situation with minimal force. Exemplary." "Thank you, sir," I replied, feeling the tiredness finally catch up with me as the adrenaline began to wear off. "Sarah." Robert finally spoke, using my first name, a rare occurrence for him. "What you did was, well, it was brave. Reckless, but brave." I looked at him, expecting the usual caveat, the but that always followed any grudging compliment he gave me. But this time, it didn't come. Instead, he held out his hand. "You proved me wrong. You're not finished, in fact. You just showed that you have what it takes to be an excellent police officer." I hesitated for a moment before shaking. It was the first time in 5 years that Robert had recognized me, not just as his stepdaughter, but as a colleague. "Thank you," I replied simply. I didn't need to say anything else. In the days and weeks that followed, much changed. Marcus was charged, but because of my recommendation and his cooperative behavior after surrendering, he was given the opportunity to participate in an intensive anger management and family counseling program as part of his sentence. Tamika and the girls received psychological support and moved into her sister's house, beginning the long process. As for me, I received a departmental commendation for crisis resolution, but the most significant change was in my relationship with my stepfather. Robert was never a man for emotional displays or apologies, but his actions spoke louder than words. He started inviting me to work lunches, asking my opinion on cases, sharing his own experiences without the condescending tone he used to. At one of these lunches, we finally had the conversation that should have happened years ago. "You know, when your dad died," he began hesitant, stirring his coffee, "I promised myself I'd do everything to protect you and your mom. And when you said you wanted to be a cop, well, all I could think about was how I lost my partner that day, how I watched the life drain out of him while we waited for the ambulance." I looked at him, surprised. Robert had never talked about the day my father died before. "Were you there?" He nodded slowly. "I was his partner that day. I never told you because dot 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 dot. Well, because I didn't want you to blame me like a blow." The revelation hit me like a blow. For all these years, I'd thought Robert's resistance to my career was simple machismo, when in reality, it was fear of losing someone else he loved too. The same profession that had taken his friend. "Robert, I never knew, you weren't supposed to know. Your mother and I thought it was better this way." He took a deep breath. "So when you joined the academy, all I could see was history repeating itself. I wanted you to quit, out of pure selfish fear. But that night, with that family, double quotes," he shook his head, a small smile forming. "You did something even I wouldn't have the courage to do. And you did it perfectly." I felt my eyes fill with tears. I was just doing my job. "No, Sarah, you did more than your job. You showed a kind of courage that comes not just from training, but from the heart." He reached across the table and took mine. "Your father would be incredibly proud." And I am. That moment marked a new beginning for us. Robert would never become the affectionate, open father he'd seen in the movies, but the barrier between us had finally been broken. He began to see me for who I truly was, not just his wife's daughter, not just a woman trying to survive in a man's world, but a competent and dedicated police officer in my own right. 3 months after that fateful night, Robert surprised everyone when, during a departmental ceremony, he was called upon to present the senior detective badge to the newly promoted officers, including me. When I arrived on stage, instead of the formal handshake I expected, Robert gave me a quick but sincere hug before handing me the badge. "Detective Sarah Reynolds," he announced, into the microphone, his voice carrying unmistakable pride. "It is with great honor that I present this badge, not only as your superior, but as someone who has witnessed firsthand your exceptional courage, integrity, and dedication to duty." As he pinned the new insignia to my uniform, he added quietly, only for me to hear, "You didn't just win the patrol back from me that night. You earned my respect forever." And so it was that, at 28, I became not only a full-time detective with the Chicago Police Department, but also, finally, a daughter in the eyes of the man who had married my mother all those years ago. The journey has not been easy, and I know there will still be many challenges ahead. Police work is never simple, especially for a woman. But that night, when my stepfather scoffed, "You're finished," during family dinner, when an armed incident hit our block and I retrieved his patrol car, something fundamental shifted in our dynamic and in my own confidence as a police officer. Today, when I look at my reflection in the mirror, adjusting my holster and badge before heading out for another day of work, I no longer see the shadow of doubt that used to haunt. I see a police officer who proved her worth, not only to her skeptical stepfather, but to herself. And that, perhaps, was the most important victory of all. Every week, I still go to those Sunday dinners, but now, when I share stories about my work, Robert listens. He really listens. Sometimes he even asks my opinion on his own cases. It's a different kind of partnership, not in the field, but at home, united by mutual respect and a shared love for our chosen profession, despite all its dangers and sacrifices. What about Marcus? I've followed his case. He's serving his sentence, actively participating in therapy, and, under court supervision, has begun supervised visits with his daughters. I don't know if his family will ever be fully reunited, but I know that on that night, all of us, Marcus, Tamika, the children, Robert and I, were given a second chance. That's what being a police officer means to me. It's not about power or authority. It's not about guns or badges. It's about being present in the most difficult moments of people's lives and doing everything possible to ensure that, even in the darkest situations, there's a chance for light at the end. And if that means entering a house alone with an armed and desperate man, against all protocol, then that's what I'll do. Not to prove anything to someone like Robert, but because I know deep down that it's the right thing to do. This is my story, my patrol restored, and it continues day after day as I don my uniform and go out to protect the streets of the city I love, not despite my gender or to prove anything to anyone, but simply because this is the job I was to do. The last time I spoke to Robert about the night of the incident, he asked me something that has stuck with me ever since. What went through your mind when you decided to go into that house alone? My answer was simple and truthful. Nothing extraordinary. I just thought, if not me, who? If not now, when? This is how I make my decisions every day. This is how I honor my father's memory and the legacy I chose to carry. This is how I reclaimed not just a patrol car, but my very identity as a police officer and as a person. And that, more than any flag or promotion, is what gets me up every morning, ready to take on any challenge the city of Chicago may throw at me. Because when my stepfather scoffed, "You're finished," during that family dinner, he couldn't have been more wrong. I was just getting started. 3 months after my promotion, my life had found a new normal. The respect I'd earned from Robert had spread to other corners of the department. There were still the sexist types around. Of course, those who believed my promotion was simply a matter of inclusion, but their voices seemed more distant now. In an ideal world, that night would have solved all the problems, but reality is rarely so simple. Robert and I still had our tense moments, especially when our policing philosophies clashed. He was old school, firm, sometimes inflexible, believing in the power of authority and intimidation. I preferred more empathetic approach, seeking connection before confrontation. "The problem with your generation, Sarah," he said during one of our weekly lunches, "is that you want to be therapists, not police officers." I took a sip of my coffee, maintaining my composure. "And the problem with your generation, Robert, is that you think respect and fear are the same thing." He frowned, then smiled reluctantly. Touché, these small exchanges had become almost a ritual for us, a familiar dance of conflicting ideologies that somehow brought us closer together rather than apart. It was progress, however slow. My first major investigation as a detective, Plina, came 2 weeks after that conversation. My partner, Detective Marcus Jimenez, and I were assigned to a missing person case that quickly turned into something darker. Lisa Caldwell, a 26-year-old elementary school teacher, had not shown up for class for 3 consecutive days. Her apartment was intact, with no signs of a struggle, but with small, disturbing details. A burnt pan on the stove, as if she had rushed out in the middle of preparing a meal, and a charged cell phone left on the coffee table. "I don't like this," Jimenez muttered as we surveyed the apartment. At 48, with 20 years of homicide experience, he had a sixth sense for troublesome cases. Adults don't just disappear without their cell phones, not in 2024. I nodded, scanning the photos on the fridge. Lisa was smiling in all of them, often accompanied by the same tall, broad-shouldered man. "Boyfriend?" "Ex," replied Jessica, her roommate, who was watching us nervously from the doorway. "They broke up about 2 months ago. He didn't handle it very." We exchanged glances. With Jimenez, we always start with those closest to us, and a resentful ex-boyfriend certainly qualified. "His name?" I asked, taking out my notebook. "David Mercer. Works in construction, I think." Less than an hour later, we were at the construction site where David worked. The supervisor informed us that he hadn't been in for 2 days, coincidentally, since Lisa's disappearance. "Two birds with one stone," Jimenez muttered as we walked back to the squad car. We got David's address and headed there. His apartment was in an old building on the west side of the city, the kind of place with narrow hallways that smelled of reheated food and cheap disinfectant. We knocked on the door. No answer. "Mr. Mercer?" "Chicago police. We need to talk." Silence. Then, almost imperceptibly, a sound of movement on the other side. "He's in there," I whispered to Jimenez, who nodded, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. "Mr. Mercer, we know you're there. Open the door now, or we'll have reason to." Break in. A few more seconds of silence, followed by heavy footsteps. The door opened a few inches, secured by a security chain. A red, bloodshot eye peered at us through the crack. "What do you want?" The voice was hoarse, as if it hadn't been used in days. "David Mercer?" I asked, flashing my badge. "Detectives Reynolds and Jimenez. We're investigating the disappearance of Lisa Caldwell." "May we come in, Lisa?" Something in her voice changed, a note of genuine concern or a convincing performance. I couldn't tell. "Is she missing? Can you open the door completely, Mr. Mercer? We need to ask you a few questions." After a brief hesitation, the door closed. We heard the sound of the chain being removed, and then it reopened completely. David Mercer was as tall as he'd appeared in the photos, but now he was disheveled, with stubble and dark circles under his eyes. The apartment behind him was in complete disarray, empty beer bottles scattered across the floor, dirty clothes piled in corners. "When was the last time you saw Lisa?" I asked after inviting us inside. "I haven't seen her in," he replied, running a hand through his greasy hair. "Since we broke up." "Do you have an alibi for the last 3 days?" Jimenez asked. "Direct, as always." David frowned. "I was here. I called in sick to work. You guys can check. And can anyone confirm this?" "No. ... I live alone." He hesitated, then his eyes widened. "Wait, you think I did something to Lisa?" "We're just gathering information, Mr. Mercer," I replied. "Why did you stop coming to work right when Lisa disappeared?" "Coincidence," he muttered, but something in his body language changed. My instincts began to sound alarms. "Would you mind if we took a look around the apartment?" Jimenez asked. "Actually, yes. Do you have a warrant?" "We can get one," I replied calmly, watching his reaction. "Or we can settle this now." He crossed his arms. "Come back with a warrant." Jimenez and I exchanged glances. Technically, David was within his rights, but his resistance only heightened our suspicions. "Mr. Mercer, I tried one last time. If you have nothing to hide, it makes it easier for everyone if ... I said no. His voice hardened. "And now, if you don't mind, I'm feeling bad. Come back with a warrant if you want to go through my things." As we walked out of the building, Jimenez muttered, "He's hiding something." "Absolutely," I agreed. "The question is, what?" We returned to the police station and began the process of obtaining a search warrant, but I knew it could take hours. While we waited, I decided to review the traffic cameras near Lisa's apartment. That's when I noticed something. David Mercer's car had been driving past her street repeatedly on the nights before she disappeared. "Stalking," I commented to Jimenez as I showed him the footage. He was watching her. We expanded our search and discovered something even more disturbing. The same car at 2:13 a.m. The day Lisa disappeared, parked 2 blocks from her apartment. The cameras showed David leaving on foot, returning 40 minutes later, apparently carrying something heavy in the trunk. The judge signed our warrant in record time. When we returned to David's apartment, however, he had disappeared. Neighbors reported seeing him hurriedly leaving with a backpack less than half an hour after our visit. His car was also missing from the garage. He ran away, Jimenez concluded as we searched the apartment. Guilty as hell. A search of the apartment revealed suspicious stains in the bathroom that reacted positively to luminol recently cleaned blood. In the trash, we found receipts from a hardware store, a shovel, quicklime, plastic tarps. My heart sank. I knew this pattern from other cases. We need to find him, I said to Jimenez, feeling time slipping through our fingers. And fast. We issued an alert to all units, including a description of David's car. Robert, now working in the command center, used his influence to expedite the paperwork needed to track David's cell phone. He's moving west, Robert informed me over the phone, taking the highway toward Aurora. Aurora? I repeated, trying to make sense of the connection. I mentally reviewed the information we had about David. Wait, doesn't your family have a cabin there? Something Jessica mentioned, ... I'm checking now. Robert was silent for a few moments, the sound of keys being typed in the background. Bingo. The Mercer family owns a rural property about 20 kilometers from Aurora. Address showing up on your GPS. I thanked him, surprised by Robert's efficiency and willingness. Not long ago, he probably would have found a way to take the case off my hands. Now, he was doing everything he could to help me solve it. Jimenez and I, accompanied by 2 backup vehicles, headed for the cabin. The drive took almost an hour, during which time the sun began to set, painting the horizon with orange hues that belied the tension we felt. The property was isolated, at the end of a dirt road surrounded by dense trees. We parked about 200 meters away, completing the rest of the journey on foot so as not to alert David with the noise of the engines. As we approached, we saw his car parked next to a rustic wooden cabin. A dim light shone through the windows. Divide and conquer? Jimenez whispered, indicating that he could circle the house to the right while I took the left. I nodded, checking my weapon. The plan was simple. Surround the cabin, identify us, and order David to come out with his hands up. The other 4 officers would remain strategically positioned, ensuring there was no escape route. Moving slowly around the perimeter, I noticed a side door that led to what appeared to be a kitchen. Through the dusty window, I could see movements, someone pacing, agitated. My radio crackled softly. It was Jimenez. I have a view of him through the back window. He's alone, seems to be, talking to himself. No sign of the victim. Understood, I replied in the lowest whisper possible. Ready to board in 3 minutes. I positioned myself next to the side door, waiting for the signal. Everyone confirmed their position. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what could be a volatile situation. David had already displayed erratic behavior, and now he was cornered a potentially dangerous combination. The signal came. Megaphones amplified Jimenez's voice across the property. Chicago police, David Mercer, come out with your hands up. The house is surrounded. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of owl. No movement inside the cabin. Jimenez repeated the command, more emphatically this time. Nothing. We exchanged worried glances through the gathering darkness. Something was wrong. David should have responded, somehow screaming, trying to run away. Something. I made a decision. I'll go in through the side, I radioed. Cover the main entrance and back. Negative, Jimenez replied. Too risky. He could be hurt or worse. We don't have time to waste. Before Jimenez could protest again, I tested the side door handle. It was unlocked. With a quick movement, I opened it and got into firing position, scanning the room with trained eyes. The kitchen was empty, but a trail of fresh blood led down the hallway. My heart raced. I followed the trail slowly, each step calculated to minimize noise. The drops continued down the hallway to a half-open door, from which came the muffled sound of a radio. I gently pushed the door open with the tip of the gun. What I saw made me freeze momentarily. David Mercer sat in a chair in the center of the room, a nearly empty bottle of whiskey in one hand, a revolver in the other. His blank gaze fixed on me, but he didn't look surprised or scared, just resigned. David, I said calmly, keeping my gun pointed, put the gun down. Now, you don't understand, he murmured, his voice cracking. I loved her. I just wanted to talk to her. Where's Lisa, David? Tears began to stream down her face. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. It was an accident. My stomach sank, but I maintained my professional composure. Put the gun down, David. Let's talk about this. He looked at the revolver in his hand as if seeing it for the first time. There's nothing to talk about. It's over. In one swift movement, he raised the gun. Not at me, but at his own temple. No! I screamed, stepping forward. The sound of the gunshot reverberated off the wooden walls of the cabin. David collapsed from his chair, landing heavily on the plank floor. Jimenez and the other officers burst into the room seconds later, finding me kneeling beside David, trying in vain to stop the bleeding. His eyes were still open, but already losing focus. Lisa, ... he murmured, his voice barely audible. ... in the barn. Those were his last words, while the paramedics, who had been called as a precaution, tended to David's body. Jimenez and I quickly made our way to the aforementioned barna-weathered wooden structure about 50 yards from the main cabin. Photos we'd studied. Her skin was pale, her lips blue, and a stab wound visible in her chest. Shit, Jimenez muttered, removing his hat in a gesture of silent respect. I closed my eyes for a feeling the familiar weight of failure. We were too late to save the victim. Something that happens often in this profession, but never gets easier to accept. A preliminary examination of the scene suggested that Lisa had been killed days earlier, likely the same night she disappeared. David had that. No matter how many years of experience you have, never fails to turn your stomach. In the center of the barn, partially covered by a plastic tarp, lay a body. Leeser Caldwell, from the apparently confronted her at her apartment. Things escalated, and he stabbed her in the heat of the moment. Then, in a panic, he transported her body to the family's secluded cabin, where he likely planned to bury her deep within the property. Our initial visit to his apartment must have alarmed him, making him realize it was only a matter of time before we discovered the truth. He chose the path of escape, and ultimately, suicide. 2 days later, sitting at Lisa Caldwell's funeral, watching her, devastated family and the young students who couldn't understand why their favorite teacher would never return, I felt that familiar doubt that occasionally haunts all police officers. What if we had acted faster? What if we had connected the dots sooner? Robert, surprisingly, attended the funeral with me. As we walked back to the car after the service, he seemed to read my thought. "You did everything right, Sarah," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Some cases just don't have happy endings, no matter how good the detective." "I know," I replied, though the guilt still weighed heavily on. "I just wish I'd gotten there in time. This is the burden we all carry." His voice carried the weight of decades of similar But remember, for every case like this, there are dozens of others where we make a difference. Like that family on South Green Street. I nodded, grateful for his attempt at comfort, though I still felt hollow inside. In the weeks that followed, I immersed myself in work, perhaps too much so, as Robert kindly pointed out during one of our lunches. "You're not going to heal that wound by working yourself to the ground," he remarked, pushing a sandwich toward me that I'd barely touched. "Trust me, I've tried that approach for years. I'm fine," I replied automatically. "No, it's not." His bluntness took me by surprise. "And you know what? It's okay to not be okay sometimes. It doesn't make you any less competent as a police officer." I looked at him, realizing how our roles had reversed. Not long ago, it was Robert who had considered me too weak for the job. Now, he was reminding me of the importance of recognizing my own limitations. "How do you deal with it?" I asked sincerely. "After all these years, how do you keep it from consuming you?" He thought for a moment, stirring his coffee. "Finding balance. At work, I give it my all. Outside of work, I don't always succeed, but I try to leave the cases at the office." Smiled slightly. "Your mother helped me a lot with that. Before her, I'd take every case home, reliving every detail, every mistake, every what if. It nearly destroyed me." I nodded, understanding. Since Lisa's death, I had done just that, obsessively reviewing every step of the investigation, every clue, every decision. "Maybe, ... I hesitate, feeling strangely vulnerable. "Maybe you could give me some insight into that?" Robert's smile widened, genuine and surprisingly warm. "It would be an honor. It was the beginning of a new facet of our relationship. Robert, the reluctant mentor, shared not only investigative techniques, but also strategies for emotionally surviving the inevitable scars the profession leaves. One particularly difficult afternoon, following a case involving a child victim of domestic violence, Robert invited me for drinks after work, another first for us. Sitting in a low-key bar frequented mostly by police officers, he told me stories of his early years on the force, the mistakes he made, the cases that haunted him, the lessons he learned the hard way. Your father, he mentioned, surprising me with the direct reference, was exceptionally good at separating work from personal life. He could walk away from a horrific crime scene and, hours later, be genuinely present, playing with you in the backyard as if the weight of the world wasn't on his shoulders. I remember that, I replied softly. Long-buried memories resurfaced. He never seemed worried or distracted when he was with me. That was his superpower. Robert took a sip of his whiskey. Mine was observation, noticing details others miss. His was perfect compartmentalization. I think you inherited a bit of both. Like this? You have sharp eyes, Sarah, but you also have the ability to genuinely connect with people, even at their worst, like you did with Marcus that night on South Green. That's rare. Most of us become cynical, distant. It's a defense mechanism. I reflected on his words, surprised by their accuracy and by the insight I had never credited him with. Thank you, she said finally, for sharing that about him and for noticing that about me. He just nodded, a silent understanding passing between us. As the months passed, our relationship continued to evolve. We worked together on a few cases, sometimes disagreeing heatedly on tactics, but always finding common ground, and Robert began incorporating some of my suggestions into his own methods, especially my more empathetic interviewing techniques, though he rarely admitted it directly. At home, Sunday dinners became lighter affairs. Instead of the constant criticism of before, there were now lively discussions about cases, departmental politics, and occasionally even laughter. My mother often watched us with an expression of happy surprise, as if she could hardly believe the transformation. 6 months after the South Green Street incident, I received surprising news. I had been recommended for the Violent Crimes Task Force, an elite unit that handled the city's most complex and high-profile cases. The recommendation had come from Robert. When I confronted him about it, he shrugged, uncomfortable with my gratitude. You deserved it. Simple as that. It's not that simple, and you know it, I insisted. There are plenty of senior detectives who would give their arm for that position, and none of them have your skill set, he replied simply. Then, with a slight smile, he added, besides, it'll look great on my legacy when I retire, having recommended the first woman to join the task force in 10 years. I rolled my eyes, but smiled. It was his way of admitting he was proud without actually saying it. My first major case on the task force came 2 weeks later, a series of violent robberies targeting elderly women returning from the bank. The perpetrator was meticulous, attacking in areas with few cameras, always covering his face and never leaving. Fingerprints. I studied the files obsessively, looking for patterns others might have missed. That's when I noticed something. All the victims frequented the same bank branch on the same day of the week, Wednesdays. He's not following victims off the street, I told the team at our morning meeting. He's selecting them inside the bank. Robert, who occasionally oversaw task force meetings, frowned. What makes you think that? The victims have nothing in common other than their age and bank. Different neighborhoods, different backgrounds, but they all withdrew significant amounts every Wednesday when the bank distributes retirement checks. So you think he works at the bank? Asks Lieutenant Garcia, the head of the town. Or he has access to inside information. I showed him a map with the locations of the robberies marked. Note that they all took place at least 10 blocks from the bank, in areas with minimal surveillance. He knows exactly where to strike to minimize the risk of capture. Robert studied the map, then nodded slowly. Cover operation then. We had a police officer disguised as an elderly lady withdrawing money on Wednesdays. Exactly what I was thinking, I agreed. Reynolds would be the logical choice for the cover, Lieutenant Garcia observed. She's identified the pattern, knows all the detail. So it was that, the following Wednesday, I found myself unrecognizable beneath a gray wig, anti-aging makeup, and oversized glasses. I entered the bank at precisely 10:45 a.m., the preferred time of previous victims, and followed the script to the letter. I withdrew a significant sum, placed it visibly in my purse, and walked out slowly, appearing vulnerable. An undercover surveillance van followed me at a distance, with Robert, Jimenez, and 2 other detectives monitoring my every move. Microphones hidden in my clothing picked up sounds around me, allowing the team to hear any approach. For 3 consecutive Wednesdays, I repeated the operation without results. We began to question our theory. Maybe he noticed the police movement, Jimenez suggested during our debriefing. Or he simply stopped while the heat died down. Or we identified the wrong pattern, I added, frustrated. Robert, who had remained silent, suddenly sat up straighter. Or maybe he's not an employee, but a customer. We all turned to him. Think about it, he continued. Someone who regularly visits the bank on Wednesdays, maybe even sitting right after. The victims watching how much they withdraw. But we don't catch anyone like that on camera, I argued. Because we were looking for employees, Robert replied. We'll review the recordings again, but this time, looking for repeat customers. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. We reviewed hours of footage, focusing on the clients who showed up regularly on Wednesdays. That's when we noticed him, a seemingly harmless, middle-aged man, always arriving minutes after our victims were seen, always discreetly watching as they stuffed their money into their purses. Kevin Larson, our team's technology specialist, identified after matching his face with the database. 47 years old, former bank security guard, fired 6 months ago for inappropriate behavior with customers. The following Wednesday, we continued the operation, but with one difference. This time, we knew who to watch. As expected, Kevin showed up at the usual time. His eyes followed me as I left the bank, my purse visibly full of cash. I followed my planned route, purposefully choosing less crowded streets. A few blocks away, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. My hand moved discreetly to the gun hidden under my oversized coat. "Ma'am, let me help you with that bag," came the falsely solicitous voice. Kevin Larson stood less than 6 feet away, one hand extended toward my bag, the other hidden in his coat pocket, probably holding a gun. I turned slowly, maintaining the posture of a frail old woman. "Young man, you're very kind, but I can carry my own." He lunged forward, grabbing my purse with one hand and, as I suspected, revealing a knife with the other. "Don't make any noise, Grandma, and no one gets hurt." That's when I dropped my disguise. In one swift, fluid motion, I drew my gun and pointed it directly at his chest. "Chicago police? Drop your weapon and put your hands where I can see them." His face registered pure shock for a moment before survival instinct took over. He tried to run, only to find Jimenez blocking one side of the street and Robert the other. The surveillance van closed in, leaving him with no way out. Kevin Larson was arrested without further incident and subsequently confessed to all 8 robberies when confronted with the evidence. My first major operation with the task force had been a resounding success.